good morning, good evening. Welcome back to the Which Carolina podcast. This is Lee Branscome. I am bringing you another Hornets-centric podcast. So if you're new to the podcast, I recap every third Hornets game. We do kind of opinions, frustrations, encouraging things. You'll see how the segment works. But if you're not new, this is my second Hornets wrap up after every third game. I'll also be bringing on guests and interviews throughout the NBA season as well. But you can certainly expect these Hornet-centric podcasts from me after every third game. So another 1-2 results in regards to these last three games. Started off with an awesome blowout win over Dallas, went downhill with a pretty horrific loss to the Memphis Grizzlies, who were without Ja Morant, and then a tough loss, but a more understandable loss to the Philadelphia 76ers. So let's just get right into this, right? So the Dallas win, we blew out the Dallas Mavericks on our home floor, who obviously have a potential MVP candidate in Luka Doncic. Kind of the highlights from that game. Miles Bridges and LaMelo Ball were terrific off the bench. Those two combined for 42 points and 24 rebounds off the bench, which was just like immediate spark plug, interjection of energy for the Hornets to play well in the first half against Dallas and then absolutely just dominate the third quarter to put the game out of reach. We also had 30 assists on 43 field goals in the Dallas game. So I think that was certainly our best performance from a ball movement standpoint. I mean, the ball's just whipping around, offensive rebounds, kickouts, driving kicks, pick and roll, transition. Everything was clicking in the Dallas win, right? And, we also forced Dallas to shoot only 39% from the field. So one of our better defensive games as well. So that Dallas win followed the Brooklyn win. So the Hornets lose to the Cavs and the Thunder to start the season, then get two wins against very likely top playoff teams. And it left us feeling all very confused, optimistic in certain ways, but a bit confused on how this team could have such differing results against such differing levels of competition, right? So the other thing I want to talk about in this quick little opening recap, the Memphis loss, in my mind, and by my observations, is a very different loss, in my opinion, than the 76ers loss. Look, there are no moral victories in the NBA. It's the most competitive and most talented basketball league on planet Earth, and you don't really get a cookie for participation. So I'm not here telling you that you should feel good about the Charlotte Hornets losing to the Philadelphia 76ers. You shouldn't, but the way in which we lost to the 76ers was by being outclassed, but from a talent standpoint. On the defensive side of the ball against the Philadelphia 76ers, and I hope someone asked James Borrego this in one of the press conferences, we essentially doubled or triple teamed Joel Embiid or Ben Simmons anytime they touched the ball on the block. And if I was to ask James Borrego, I would phrase it as, look, I completely understand the dilemma you're in there, right? Like if you stay one-on-one with Bismack Biyombo or PJ Washington or Miles Bridges, whoever it is that is guarding Joel Embiid in that situation, it's certainly very likely that Joel Embiid is just going to absolutely kill you. He's that good. He's that massive. But the flip side of that is, as we're running these double and triple teams at Joel Embiid, he's also skilled enough to whip the ball out of those double teams, either with skip passes or back to where the entry came from. And then the ball gets swung around the horn for wide open corner threes. And Seth Curry and Danny Green really made us pay for doubling Joel Embiid. So it's not that I don't appreciate the fact that the Hornets are between a rock and a hard place when they're trying to cover Joel Embiid, pick your poison. But after continually doubling him and triple teaming him over and over again and consistently giving up wide open threes to historically good NBA 3-point shooters. I just wonder if Borrego would have maybe wished he would have changed that coverage scheme up halfway through the game. But back to the main point, the Memphis Loss, who, again, they were down John Morant. They don't have Jaren Jackson Jr. Even Grayson Allen didn't play, who, say what you want about Grayson Allen, but he has turned into a rotational wing in the NBA. He is fairly important to that Grizzlies rotation. We lose to a incredibly shorthanded Memphis Grizzlies team. And honestly, it was just a lack of effort, a lack of focus, a lack of intensity. Obviously, we didn't make shots either. But my point here is, if the Hornets would have played with the same intensity and fervor and enthusiasm as they did against the 76ers in the Memphis game, we would likely be 3-3 right now instead of 2-4. So the difference between the losses to the Grizzlies and the 76ers is we gave awesome effort, bless their hearts, right? Like, they still couldn't win the game because Philly's really good right now in the early season. They have two legitimate stars on their team. But then we don't give 100% effort, which you have come to expect. And look, there are fair criticisms of James Borrego. I'm a James Borrego fan, but I understand you can nitpick him. One thing we really haven't had to nitpick him on is having the team ready, at least from an energy and effort standpoint. And that was not the case against Memphis. I guess coming off of the Dallas and Brooklyn wins, this Hornets team thought they had arrived in some sense. And they really laid an egg at home against Memphis in a game in which you need, in a shortened season, only 72 games. If this team is serious about making the play-in tournament or even just straight up making the playoffs, then you can't have stinkers like that. You can lose on the road to Philadelphia if you give a good effort. You can't lose at home to Memphis if you don't give a good effort. So that's really just what I wanted to say in regards to that 3-game recap. Let's get into another reoccurring segment that I'm going to be bringing in on these Hornet-centric wrap-up pods. Best thing I saw in this 3-game segment and the worst thing I saw in this 3-game segment. These two are much more specific than my last ones. But the best thing that I saw, again, does involve Terry Rozier. The dunk over Kevin Durant was the best thing I saw in the previous 3-game cycle. I'm just going to kind of do an ode to Terry Rozier here, who, don't get me wrong, he did have one stinker. He was not great in the Memphis game by any means. He didn't shoot the ball well. But let me give you his numbers right now as we're 6 games into this early season. Terry Rozier, again, coming off a career year, shooting from the field, from three-point line, from free throw, just about any measurable shooting statistic you want to check him by. He had a career year last year, his first year in Charlotte. So contextualizing this year's numbers with the realization that he's already coming off a career year shooting the basketball. 23 points per game through 6 games, 3.2 rebounds per games, 2.8 assists per game. Compare that to 2.3 turnovers and 1 steal per game. His PER, which is his player efficiency rating, which is it's a stat that is a smorgasbord of other measurables to create a player efficiency rating. His is 19.78 right now, which is the highest on the team. That's not the end all be all by any means, but it is a useful stat point to bring up when you're trying to figure out who your most efficient players are. Effective field goal percentage. So that is a little bit more detailed than just regular field goal percentage. That combines 2-pointers and 3-pointers. So it adjusts for the fact that 3-pointers are worth more than 2s. His effective field goal percentage right now is 60%, which is very good. His true shooting percentage, which is even more detailed, that combines 2-point percentage, 3-point percentage, and free throw percentage. So it gives you kind of the holistic view of a player's shooting profile. So far this season, Terry Rozier has a 68.3 true shooting percentage, which is terrific. He's shooting 49% from a traditional field goal percentage standpoint on 16 attempts per game. So that's high volume. And he's shooting 45% from 3 on 8.5 attempts per game, which is also high volume. So I say all this to say, Terry Rozier is not a primary playmaker. He's not someone You want the ball in his hands, constantly making decisions and trying to play make for others. If you expect that from Terry Rozier, you're going to be disappointed. That's not what he is. Terry Rozier is also limited by his size. He's a 6'3" shooting guard. He's not a 6'7" two-way jumbo wing. So he is limited in certain senses. But he's a 26-year-old on a 2-year contract, 2 years left on his contract. He's owed $18 million this year and $17 million next year by the Charlotte Hornets. So next year, Terry Rozier will be an expiring contract. And he's coming off a career year shooting the basketball, and he is on track to essentially outdo that career year this year. So I say all this to say, Terry Rozier has his limitations. I am the first one to admit that. But if you don't think that Terry Rozier has value in the trade market, you're kidding yourself. Terry Rozier, besides maybe, of course, PJ Washington and LaMelo Ball, who are very young and developing assets on a positive trajectory, Terry Rozier is probably our third most valuable asset right now. Depending on how this Hornets season goes, I do not want to see Terry Rozier traded, but the possibility of that could become a reality if the Hornets continue to struggle and if they fall out of the playoff race and if they fall out of the play-in race, because there's going to be contenders out there that will convince themselves that Terry Rozier, that they are one Terry Rozier away, that they are one high volume, efficient shooter off the bench or in the starting lineup around whoever their nuclear star is from an NBA championship. And if we can get solid return on Terry Rozier in the trade market near the deadline, if this team is falling out of the competitive race, I think most fans would be surprised how much Terry Rozier could fetch on the open market. So again, I really don't want to talk about potential trade scenarios. None of this is a reality at the moment. What is a reality at the moment is that Terry Rozier is having another career shooting year, that he is our most reliable scorer and shooter right now, that he's 26 years old on a manageable contract that is expiring after next year, and he has pretty measurable value in the trade market in the NBA right now. And that's all I have to say about that. Worst thing I saw in this 3-game segment, we've got to talk about Devonte Graham a little bit. So I will preface this by saying our offense and our net rating, from an on-off standpoint, Devonte Graham is still very important to this team. Devonte Graham is still averaging 7 assists per game and less than 1 turnover per game. So Devonte Graham has the ball in his hands a lot. He is making plays for others. He is creating shots for his teammates, and he does not turn the ball over. And because of that, the Charlotte Hornets net rating, how they perform against their competition when Devonte Graham is on the floor, is much higher than when he's off the floor. When Devonte Graham is off the floor, the Charlotte Hornets net rating craters. And it's a small sample size. We're only 6 games into the season. That could change, over a 15 to 20 game sample size. But right now, and this was absolutely the case last year, the net rating, the competitiveness of this team against their opponents craters when Devonte Graham is off the floor. I say all that to frame my appreciation for what he brings to the offense with a dose of reality that he has been abysmal shooting the ball this season. I mean, just horrific. He's averaging only 9 points a game, which is down from about 17 points per game last year. He is shooting 25% from the field, which is just horrific. He's making 1 of every 4 shots he takes. He's shooting 28% from 3-point, which is not good, as you can imagine. I'll let you do some back of the envelope math there. He's shooting 20% from 2-point. His effective field goal percentage, 33%. His true shooting percentage, 35%. So compare that to Terry Rozier, right? Devonte Graham, effective field goal percentage, 33%. Terry Rozier, 60%. True shooting percentage, Devonte Graham, 35%. Terry Rozier, 63%. It's gotten to the point where Devonte Graham is kind of doing these non-confident ghost pump fakes when he's open from 3. Like, defender still a step or two or three away from him, and he's showing a ball fake rather than just letting the ball fly. I'm not going to dive into any theories on why this is happening. Obviously, Devonte Graham is making a transition from always having the ball in his hands last year and constant pick and roll action to sharing usage rate more with Gordon Hayward and LaMelo Ball, being off the ball more, not shouldered with all the playmaking load. But I'll be honest, I thought that would actually improve him as a shooter, hunting shots off ball more with Hayward on the floor than it has. He has looked incredibly uncomfortable in this kind of more hybrid guard role than being a pick and roll offensive engine. So it's frustrating right now. It's hard to watch. Last night against the 76ers was in particular really tough to watch. I thought that after Devonte Graham, he hit a huge three late in the Brooklyn game in the left-hand corner that honestly basically sealed the win for the Charlotte Hornets. I thought that would be an impetus for confidence for him. I thought he would have some big games coming off that big shot against Brooklyn, but he just has not been able to get things going. So worst thing I've seen in this 3-game segment, with the framing that he's still very important to the offense because teams still guard him like he's a 37 to 40% three-point shooter right now, but he's not. And that'll eventually change if he doesn't make a shot, for Pete's sake. So wanted to kind of lay out the reality of his challenges while also still being reasonable about what he brings to the team. I'm still a believer that he can get things turned around, but right now, Devonte Graham was the worst thing I saw in the last 3 games. Moving on to our kind of broad NBA ratings segment, I think this is something that's important that fans can understand from an advanced numbers standpoint. It's very easy, but can also be very prescriptive, and you can kind of follow along the updates as I do these 3-game segments to know where the Charlotte Hornets stand in the NBA landscape from an offensive rating standpoint, from a defensive rating standpoint, from a net rating standpoint. So we can kind of track the team. How are they doing over the course of the year? And obviously these ratings, they can change much quicker right now, early in the season, because 2 really bad defensive games can plummet your defensive rating over a small sample size, so there are a lot of volatility early in the season with these ratings, but they will start to stabilize over larger game segments. Once we're 20 and 30 and 40 games into the season, we'll have a much more clear understanding of where this team really stands in the competitive landscape. But it's fun to follow and it's informational for the audience. So right now, the Hornets are 21st in offensive rating, which is measured by how many points per 100 possessions you score. So not how many points per game you score, because that's a little bit less informative, a little too broad. When you do points per 100 possessions, there's less variability there. It's a little bit more measurable across teams. So 21st in offensive rating, 105.5 points per 100 possession. So certainly below average in offensive rating right now at 21st, but also not bottom 5, right? So below average, but not horrendous, essentially, is how that breaks down. And we'll talk a little bit more when we get into good stats, bad stats. We'll talk about maybe why that might be, why they're struggling from an offensive rating standpoint. The bright spot has been the defense, not last night against Philly, who blitzed us, but overall, the defense is actually quite improved this year so far. 14th in defensive rating in the NBA, so that's basically right at league average. 108.1 points per 100 possessions allowed. For reference, last year the Hornets were 25th in defensive rating. They gave up 112 points per 100 possessions. So far this year, there has been a meaningful improvement from a defensive standpoint from the Charlotte Hornets. So that's something I'm going to continue to monitor. That's something I'm going to continue to talk about so that you all can understand and see where the Hornets rank. So net rating, which is just offensive rating and defensive rating combined. The Hornets are negative 2.6. So their opponents are essentially, all that means negative 2.6. We're allowing 2.6 points per 100 possessions more than we're scoring. That's 22nd in the NBA. Last year, the Hornets were 27th in net rating. So there's some marginal improvement there as well. If the Hornets stay league average defensively, if we hover around that 13 to 14 to 15 to 16th in defensive rating, I actually think over a large sample size, that's potentially a playoff team. The problem is, it's a small sample size, and can we keep it up, especially with the way Philly kind of diced us up last night. So that's where we're at from a rating standpoint through 6 games. I will continue to update that again after 9 games, after 12 games, after 15. So you guys can keep understanding where we are from a rating standpoint. All right, good Hornet stats, bad Hornet stats. Good Hornet stats. We're still first in the league in assist percentage. 73.9% of the Hornets' possessions that they score are assisted. And that's a good thing from a ball movement standpoint. That's a good thing from an offensive continuity standpoint. That's a good thing probably from a coaching standpoint, from an offensive, from a schematic offensive standpoint. The ball's popping around. We're creating shots for our teammates. We've talked about what the flip side of that might be. It might mean that we don't have great isolation scores, and that our offense really needs to be derived from ball movement and passing. So there is a little bit of a flip side there, but on the whole, generally, I do think that's a very positive statistic to continue to highlight. Like, this Hornets team shares the ball, they move it, and they create opportunities for their teammates. 7th overall in the NBA in assist to turnover ratio. So we are a good bit above league average in regards to how many assists do we create versus how many turnovers do we give up. So that's always a good thing, especially when you consider the next stat, which is pace. The Hornets are 10th in pace in the NBA, which means they are playing demonstrably faster than they did last year when they were last in pace over an 82-game sample size. So 6 games in, we're 10th in pace. We're playing a lot faster. We're taking care of the ball, and we're sharing the ball. 3-pointers made. We're 12th in 3-pointers made at 12.7 a game. That's a good thing. From a shot profile standpoint, do some teams get a little bit carried away with their 3-point shooting? Sure. But from an analytic shot profile standpoint, it is good that the Charlotte Hornets are assisting on a lot of shots and that they are taking a bunch of threes. To parlay that stat, 3-point percentage, 36%, 14th in the NBA. Over, honestly, like a 20-year sample size, 35% from 3 is league average. So the Hornets are just barely above league average from a historical standpoint. And this year, so far, 6 games in, they are basically dead league average from a 3-point percentage standpoint, 36%, 14th in the league. Offensive rebounds, they're 6th in the league, 11.7. Biz, Miles, even LaMelo gets in there and sticks his nose in there for offensive rebounds. They do a good job crashing the glass, and we're 4th in steals per game, 9.8 steals per game. So those are some good Hornet stats to continue to monitor. Here are some bad ones. And here is part of the reason why that offensive rating is so low, despite the fact that the Hornets do an incredibly good job moving the ball and sharing the ball and creating shots for their teammates. Here's honestly the proof in the pudding of why the Charlotte Hornets offense has stalled out at times. It's because we're 20th in the league in effective field goal percentage, 51%. We're 25th in the league in true shooting percentage at 54%. We're 22nd in the league in traditional field goal percentage at 44%. We're 27th in the league in free throw percentage, 69%. If you remember from the last segment, we were dead last in free throws by a large margin. We've actually corrected that fairly quickly to move up to 27th, which is still very bad, but it's not last, and it's not last by a large margin. And then turnover percentage, we are 22nd in turnover percentage. So, the Hornets are creating a nice analytical shot profile. They're taking a lot of threes. They're making threes at a league average. They're assisting more than pretty much any other team in the NBA. They're sharing the ball movement's there, but we aren't making shots. Like, we're just not making enough shots. And that was embarrassingly obvious with Joel Embiid in the game. We couldn't do anything around the basket. And I think these percentages that I just rattled off, they're even worse when you realize that we're shooting league average from three. So how bad do we have to be around the basket, in the mid-range, at the free throw line for our 3-point league average percentage to be dragged down so much to, bottom 10 in the league in pretty much every meaningful shooting statistic? That means we're struggling from the free throw line. We're struggling from two because we're league average at three. So those are good Hornet stats, bad Hornet stats. All right. 2 more quick segments and I will get you guys out of here. I'll stop squawking at you. Melo Minute. This is going to be a reoccurring segment. Shout out one of our listeners that suggested the Melo Minute as I kind of implored and begged our audience to help me name this segment. Let's talk about LaMelo Ball. LaMelo Ball is averaging 11.5 points per game, 4.3 rebounds per game, 4.2 assists per game compared to 2.3 turnovers, so almost doubling up his assist to turnover ratio, 1.8 steals per game. LaMelo is shooting 42% from the field on 9 attempts a game, and he's shooting 42% from three on 4.3 attempts per game. He's shooting 41% from two on 5 attempts per game. His effective field goal percentage is 51%. His true shooting percentage is 54%. So LaMelo Ball's playmaking, passing creativity, pick and roll, synergy, his operation ability in the half court, his ability to get by guys and create for others or himself, like all that is translated right away. The passing is on full display. LaMelo's, honestly, he's probably a top 20 passer in the NBA as a 19-year-old, which is astounding, frankly, because sometimes passing can be the most difficult skill for young players to translate to the NBA because the defense is sped up from a length and size and speed standpoint. It's just incredibly impressive how he is able to walk into the NBA as an effective facilitator. That has translated right away, which should be expected. No one should be really surprised by that necessarily if you watched LaMelo in Australia. What is surprising and what is incredibly optimistic in my mind is the 3-point percentage, 42%. Look, it's only over 6 games. Do I expect LaMelo Ball to shoot over 40% from three on the year? I don't. But if LaMelo Ball is a league average 3-point shooter, which we just talked about, which is around 35%, he's got some wiggle room of 7% to drop down over a large sample size. That is a win in his rookie year. And he also hasn't really taken any of those crazy bad shots, as I use quotations here, that he kind of became famous for in the viral social media world in high school and in prep school. LaMelo has been he's been discerned in the shots he takes. Like, he's not taking any crazy shots. So not only is he being fairly selective from his shot standpoint, he's also making them at a much higher percentage, I think, than anyone anticipated, at least early in his career. Look, he's not a great point of attack defender right now. I've talked about this a couple times. He's going to struggle as a 19-year-old to slide and cut off and rotate with elite on-the-ball playmakers in the NBA, at least for now. But what he does have is defensive anticipation. He sees plays before they happen. He rotates into passing lanes. When a defender gets an offensive rebound, watch him. You'll see him do this. He will poke the ball away from the opponent defensive rebounder, take it, and create another possession for the Charlotte Hornets. He's lank. Obviously, he's 6'7", and he's got a nice wingspan. He gets his hands in passing lanes. He gets deflections. the defensive anticipation ability is not something that's very teachable. You can help someone with that, but you can't really fully teach it to someone. It's one of those things you either kind of have or you don't. The point of attack defense in which he struggles, guarding other point guards, sliding and staying in front of people, understanding where he's supposed to rotate on defense, those are all teachable. He can develop those skills. So my point here is LaMelo Ball has the defensive anticipation ability that's harder to teach, and his weaknesses, which are weaknesses, they are flaws right now, but they are more easily correctable flaws than not having instincts. And he has instincts in spades, and that's impressive, and that's important when you're thinking about the trajectory of what his development might be. Do I care if he starts? This has been a very, I guess, polarizing discussion point in NBA and Hornets Twitter. I don't really care if he starts, to be completely honest. It's not something that keeps me up at night. It's not something that I even feel is significantly important to his development. What do I care about? I care about what his minutes per game are. You know, I do think he should be playing a little bit more, but let's look at his minutes per game in order by game, starting at game 1, going to game 6. Here are LaMelo Ball's minutes per game: 16, 15, 20, 29, 27, 31. So in the last 4 games, he's played above 20 minutes per game. In the last 3 games, he's played above 25 minutes per game. My point here is take a deep breath, Hornets fans. We have a 6'7", 19-year-old lead guard that shows unique basketball instincts on both sides of the floor. It's possible we have a future star on our hands, and that's hard to find in Charlotte. So let's not freak out on whether he's starting right away, and let's look at the general trend of his minutes per game and him in the rotation. And that is increasing quickly. So things are going to be just fine. And if LaMelo Ball keeps playing and affecting the game on both sides positively, like he has been, he will continue to play more. So I'm more concerned about his minutes per game. I'm more concerned about whether he's closing the game on the floor in competitive situations. And I'm more concerned about him being in successful lineups and situations for his positive development over a long-term cycle. That's what we should be concerned about. That's what we should be paying attention to. Whether he starts or not is irrelevant, frankly, in the long term. But I understand the frustration. I'm not here to get down on you, Hornets fans. I get it. The kid's been awesome. He's the future of our franchise, and you want to see him out there. I don't blame you. I do too. I'm just trying to reframe this, take a deep breath, and understand the positive attributes that he's shown and the trajectory that he's on from a rotation and minute standpoint. So that's our LaMelo minute. We will continue to do that every episode because, frankly, it's deserved. Like, I wouldn't be talking about LaMelo Ball if he wasn't playing, or if his contributions were so insignificant to this team that it didn't matter. It does matter. He's shown that already. So we're going to talk about him. Last little couple notes here. From a lineup standpoint, this will get more interesting as the season goes along too. I'll have better information and more robust statistical numbers to pull from, but it's worth at least mentioning so far. Starting lineup, not great. That's Devonte Graham, Terry Rozier, Gordon Hayward, PJ Washington, and Bismack Biyombo. 120 possessions for that group, which is our top rotation group. They've played the most minutes out of any combination. They are minus 29.3. So what? We talked about that net rating earlier, right? The Hornets are negative 2.3 overall net rating, all their lineups combined. This specific lineup, which happens to be our starting lineup, is negative 29.3. So that is contributing big time to our negative net rating. They've got to figure out how the starting lineup can be more productive. Maybe that's plugging in Melo Ball, potentially. It might mean also taking Biz out of the starting lineup and starting PJ Washington at the 5 and Miles Bridges at the 4. Although I do love Miles Bridges coming off the bench. And that parlays into our next little lineup indicator. PJ at the 5, which is something all Charlotte Hornets fans are interested in and should be paying attention to. PJ Washington at the 5, 146 possessions, plus 9.6 net rating. So this was a very ineffective lineup combination last season when PJ was a rookie. Playing him at center was not productive from a net rating standpoint. It is so far this year. Small sample size, 6 games in, but that's something that's interesting. This kind of small ball, Miles Bridges at the 4, PJ Washington at the 5 lineup has been productive. I think you'll see more of it. And maybe that's the answer. Maybe that's the answer to not having our starting lineup net rating crater. One last little note on lineups. Last night against the Philadelphia 76ers was the first time in the entire season that LaMelo Ball, Devonte Graham, and Terry Rozier all were on the floor together at one time. It was late in the fourth quarter. James Borrego had not tried that yet. I've been wondering if he was going to try it. Obviously, Oklahoma City is kind of a recent example last year with Chris Paul, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and Dennis Schroeder that had a really potent and productive 3-guard lineup. We'll have to monitor that moving forward to see how much James Borrego is willing to go to that lineup. And if he is actually willing to go to that lineup, is it productive or not? Before I get you guys out of here, next 3 games are we're at Philly again because of COVID and everything. They're trying to play back-to-backs in the same cities this year to keep the travel down. So on the 4th, we're at Philly again. On the 6th, we're at Atlanta, and on the 8th, we're at New Orleans. So schedule does not get any easier. 3-game road swing: Philly, Atlanta, New Orleans. All 3 very possible playoff teams. I will have another recap post the New Orleans Pelicans game. And we had one question on the mailbag at Patrick Connor 7. Would it hurt to give one of the second-round centers a look? So Patrick is asking whether Vernon Carey Jr. or Nick Richards should be given an opportunity to get into the rotation. And it's kind of a cop-out, but I'm going to say maybe. There's a couple variables here. So I already talked about the fact that the starting lineup has not been a productive lineup. Bismack Biyombo is in that starting lineup. Bismack Biyombo's net rating on the Charlotte Hornets while he's on the floor has not been incredibly impressive. Now, you still see things that Biz does that doesn't necessarily show up in the box score. Obviously, he's one of my favorite Hornets just from like a personal standpoint. He plays incredibly hard. He sets screens. He dives on the floor. He gives 100% defensive effort. Like, there are things Biz does that are important, but I do think that it's possible, and I'm a little bit more bullish on Nick Richards than I am Vernon Carey Jr. I have been that way since evaluating the 2020 NBA draft class. Nick Richards was in the low to mid 20s for me. Vernon Carey Jr. was in the low 30s. So splitting hairs a little bit, but I did prefer Nick Richards specifically because I think Nick Richards can develop as a floor stretcher faster than Vernon Carey Jr. can. And I think Nick Richards is a better switchable defender and a better rim protector than Vernon Carey Jr. is. So I would like to see more Nick Richards. The other variable to this is if you're playing Biz and one of these second round guys, Carey Jr. or Richards, that could potentially cut down on the PJ at the 5 minutes. If you're trying to work 2 centers into the rotation, you're less likely probably to have PJ playing at the 5, which I think the Hornets should lean into a little more. So that would be kind of the one drawback, I think, to getting Richards or Vernon Carey in the rotation, is the challenge of still trying to play a lot of PJ at 5. But I don't think that Biz has been so great that it's crazy to insinuate that maybe Richards or Carey Jr. deserves a shot. Obviously maybe not before Biz in the rotation, but maybe instead of Biz in the third quarter or something like that. Some spot minutes here or there to see how they react and can do. So thanks for the question, Patrick. Continue to follow us at Which Carolina on Twitter. Please, if you're listening to the podcast and you're enjoying our content, hit subscribe so that you'll automatically download every episode. leave us a review if at all possible. That helps us with the algorithms on the line. And look out for more content.